What can we learn from our past to ensure we keep innovating in the future? Welcome back, mere mortals. Another edition of the book reviews. Another time for us to transcend mere mortality and review another book. Today I have Innovation in Australia by Ben Kehoe, Creating Prosperity for Future Generations. Now, I want to give you a little insight into how I came about to get this book in my hot little hands. And that was myself and Karen, we were out doing a podcast, one of our usual weekly podcasts that we do outdoors, and this particular individual walked by. He came across us. It was looking quite nice. It was just before we actually started our podcast. We got into having a bit of a conversation. Little did I know that it was Ben Kehoe. I actually ended up catching up with him a little bit after that initial conversation. We got talking to around his new book, Innovation in Australia. And so at long last, I've actually gone through and reviewed it. And yeah, let's just talk about it now. So firstly, a little bit about Ben himself. So he's been working at the coalface for over 4 decades with different businesses in the actual conversation of innovation, alongside being an individual consultant and working with a lot of CEOs to understand how to progress, how to innovate, how to stay ahead. So over the last decade, Ben has been exploring social media, blogging specifically, and the wide-ranging conversation around innovation to understand where the path is leading to. And really, this is where the book came from. Innovation in Australia is actually a compilation of the blogs that Ben released over quite a period of time. I'm not exactly sure how many years. But it all came to fruition where in a lot of these blogs, he was talking about innovation. He was talking about the different pieces of information that he has learned throughout his times. And he turned that into a book. Basically, someone suggested that to him and he said, yep, this would be a great idea. Compiled it down. I believe from personally having this conversation with Ben, he did let me know that this book was a much bigger book to begin with. But of course, once you do the editing process, it gets slimmed down. So it's quite a quick read. And for me, I'm always not a quick reader, but I was able to consume this effortlessly. So onto the actual book and what is it all about? So as I said, it's a fairly tight book. It's actually split up into 4 parts, 10 chapters in total. And it basically weaves a little bit of a story. It takes us through a little bit of history around Australia, what was, where we came from, some of the ideals behind there, and then specifically around business and innovation. Where do we stand worldwide, globally? How does that look in comparison? And it's got a lot of figures. I'm not going to go and pull out any of those particular figures. You can go and obviously read the book or find out more about yourself. But really, what I took away was Australia sits somewhere in the middle across those rankings, with some of them looking not as great as we would imagine. And then lastly, talking about the future. So what does that mean for Australia? What does that mean for innovation? How can we continue to be prosperous for future generations? What will that entail? What are the acts that we have to make and do? And specifically in this book, Ben is focusing on how business, either in the way that they can step up to do more things, or perhaps they need to be championed to do more things, are key highlights that Ben goes through in the actual book. One key point as well that Ben makes throughout this book around innovation is also the conversation around the revolutions, the industrial revolutions. And these have been said in multiple different formats. We talk about the first industrial revolution, which is, and I've got it right here in front of me, the mechanization of water and steam. Second being the electric power and created mass production. Third being information technology, automated production. And then we go into the fourth industrial revolution. And that is building on the third, going down the path of a digital revolution. And what we might think ourselves in Australia as being the country that might be leading ahead, the stats beg to differ, especially around that entrepreneurship, around the new ideas that we're imposing. And it was abundantly clear, obviously, with a lot of the other examples that Ben put through in this book, is how little of, say, manufacturing takes a part across our global GDP and what we actually produce, how many companies actually come and buy out a lot of Australian companies. So there was a lot of examples around Chinese companies buying a lot of our food industries, as well as other global players. And he kind of makes a little suggestion, a question. Why is this? Is it that we're not seeing the potential innovation around here? Are we too lazy to be putting it forward? And that's the other big thing that I you take through this book, and that's that mentality and the idea that we live, specifically here in Australians, we live in a country where it's, we enjoy the relaxing times. We enjoy just being chilled out, hanging out. Doesn't have to be about go, being always productive. Now, that's obviously a huge generalization. Do I see that in all cases? Definitely not. But what the stats actually show in terms of our numbers, in terms of what we put at the very top podium, who do we idolize? We idolize those top sports persons who are doing great things for Australia. And in fact, we've got a huge amount of them. Like, I personally, looking back, I was always a massive supporter of Ian Thorpe, in swimming, and we've always been a really great country when it comes to swimming. And when you think about those idols, you think, yes, swimmers, or you think sports people, or some type of sports, or something quite different. And I guess another trend that he talks through in this book, Ben, is, when was the last time we idolized business individuals? So someone who's actually pushing the boundary or the envelope around innovation and being prosperous, like the way that we might see, say, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos and some of the other guys, where, they're titans of their industries. They're pushing the boundaries. Take Elon Musk, he's looking at changing the way that we think about space and the cost of actually going to space, the way that we drive our cars. There might have been some other conversations where electric cars were coming, but he definitely put front and center electric cars into being a viable production-ready cars, which are now, it might spawn, who knows where it goes, right? So these innovations, you think of those individuals in the business context as, yes, those are the top leaders. But the question he asks here is, what about that innovation in Australia? Where are those people? Another example he provided from some of his historical knowledge was they had to sit down amongst 5 people. I can't really recall who it was. And they named down who would be the top 5 people that you would want to have next to you, or leading the way in terms of innovation, or putting forward this great new idea. And they actually struggled to come out with a great number of individuals. And again, that kind of showcase, realistically, if it is so hard across history to find who are those key people that you say, yes, they were leading the charge, they were leading innovation, what does that say to just everyday life and being able to really find it in just everyday companies or smaller companies, or just, in you and me, the immortals? Now, the biggest theme for me, and also the learning, so I'll try to combine them as well, was moonshots. So I'm going to take the wording of moonshots. And it's not that he's talking a lot about this through the book, Ben, but he did reference to it at the very end. And it does reflect back to me around also thinking about moonshots in that personal level. So the theme there being that Australia as a whole, and let's take in particular that example around water. So Australia, currently 25, 26 million people, depending on when you're listening to this, might be more. We don't, let's say there is a struggle with water. There is an issue in terms of getting water to all the population of Australia. We might not notice this in the capital cities, but when you're talking about farmers, or you're thinking of someone who's a little bit rural, there is difficulties around water. And the whole consensus being, for Australia to become maybe in a place that has 60 million people, 70 million people, we are just not in the position to be able to efficiently, effectively provide water to all those individuals, especially if we're starting to spread them out across the country. And the polarizing view that he gives in this particular book is also how in Tel Aviv, right, they had the same issue of water in the desert, and how quickly they've been able to manage a solution so that they can keep on growing and not have that issue of a lack of water. Now, that is just one example where Ben actually proposes, look, we need an almost a moonshot, a big, massive idea, something in the moon that we go, okay, we're going to just aim to go and do this as a whole country, not just as one business, not just as a state, but everybody needs to get together and put their ideas together and just say, okay, look, we're going to aim to do these 5 things, these 6 things. And he did know that the CSIRO put together something similar to this, where it was a couple of sentences of where Australia could be by 2030, I believe it was, with a few descriptive sentences to say, in this particular areas, we're actually going to be able to go and be better by this particular year. I also wanted to bring up the moonshots that Ben actually proposed at the tail end of the book. And I'm going to actually read them because they might get you thinking, as they did me. So one is Australia, the healthiest nation in the world, leading the world in all health-related areas. 2, biotechnology to replace mining as a major driver of Australia's wealth creation. 3, an Australian Nestle, a global top 5 food provider. 4, a national transport system modeled on the best in the world. 5, Australia as a renewable energy hub for the world, especially for Asian countries. 6, Australia is a water resilient for a population of 70 to 100 million. Australian top 10 defense technology exporters in the world. Resurrection of Australian manufacturing. Australia's trade link with Asia to be at least 50% by 2050. And an Australian space project, a literal moonshot, landing a person on the moon. So, a few takeaways for me of the actual book of Innovation in Australia by Ben Kehoe. It is very focused on business. It is very, very, very focused on innovation as the various industries that exist. It isn't a broad scope where you might dial this down to an individual. So this is more a read for, who would I say it? Professors, directors, company owners, people who actually want to make a difference. Does it translate to the you and me who might, thinking, well, I want to just transform the world or I want to transform Australia? Look, not in part, it's not directly attributed to you, but what it is saying is, as a country, holistically, everybody, we need to get on board with an innovation, with an idea, with those moonshots so we can say, yes, we are doing X, Y, Z for this reason, for this purpose, and we can all get behind it, regardless of the impacts or the difficulties that we might lie. Because again, we work in a cyclical system where we might propose, hey, let's have a train that goes from Brisbane to Melbourne. But all of a sudden, it gets agreed to by the particular federal government at the time. 3 years later, new party comes to play. They don't like it. We've just wasted all this money on strategizing, planning, whatever have you, and now we're not even building it. So the same thing can be said for water strategies, so we're going to be able to get our population to 70 to 100 million. Same thing can be said for transportation, for logistics, with how we interact with the country. It really puts forward an idea that if we're going to be able to innovate and be able to put ourselves at the forefront of countries around the world when it comes to innovation and be able to pursue greatness through generations, then we need to be able to go and transcend those mere 3-year boundaries, 5-year criticalities. We're going to be thinking 2030, 2050, 2100. What does Australia look like 2100 from an innovation, from a business perspective? What do we want to be leading on? Is it food? Is it manufacturing, etc.? So those are the thoughts that sort of popped to mind when I read Innovation in Australia by Ben Kehoe. So for that, I gave it a pretty good ranking for this particular kind of book, a 6.5. So why a 6.5? It's not a book that I personally would go back to read again. Reason being, reading it through, it was crystal clear. And you could also tell that it also was extracted from blogs. So it was clear to read. There wasn't any jargon in there that you might think, especially given it's a business book. You might go, okay, I don't really want to read this. It's going to be like a textbook. Definitely not. It's like reading a compact view of lots and lots of blogs on the particular topic, obviously refined, reviewed, and made consumable. How long will it take you? Look, you could probably smash this down in 3 to 4 hours. And Ben himself is a lovely, lovely guy. So I would actually recommend you go and purchase and check out this book. Last thoughts from me. Innovation in Australia has helped me have a bit of a think around what my personal moonshots are as well. So that's the link that I took personally in terms of this sort of business book and what it looks like to me. And also helped align, although at least at a very long term, these are some of the challenges that Australia faces in some of the things that I work, in some of the ways that I donate, in some of the ways that I support. Am I supporting the larger picture? Is there a larger picture? And perhaps I'm just a little bit more informed now of being able to have that conversation in the larger grand scheme of things. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this review of Innovation in Australia by Ben Kehoe. If you're watching right now in the video, make sure you're doing all the great six of subscribing, liking, commenting, etc. We'll also be putting in the description a link where you can go and find this Innovation in Australia book so you can go purchase. There is some benefits that we get here at the Mere Mortals, but if we want to help out, feel free to do that, or go and find it in whichever other way. Would recommend to have a bit of a read. If you're listening to the audio at the moment, thank you very much for tuning in. Subscribe, share with friends, tell the world. Mere Mortals, one out.